Fantastic. So, Admiral Starling, Vice Admiral Starling, it's been a long time since we've spoken, and what we're looking to do is kind of wind your career back. We'd like to take you back into scouting. So, can you give us a brief introduction, and then I'm going to ask some questions and bring you back into your youth.
Okay, sure. First of all, I appreciate the formalities and the title, but I'm a retired guy now, so I think it'd be just fine if we went by Denby and Ed, if that's okay with you.
Fine.
Um, as background for your scout troop and your scouting family, um, I did 36 years in the Navy, mostly as a naval aviator flying off of aircraft carriers. At the end of my naval career, at the end of my flying career in the early 90s, I commanded a squadron that flew in Operation Desert Storm. We flew off of USS Ranger. It's a beautiful old ship. And then after that, I went into the Navy's nuclear power program, and I was involved in aircraft carriers for a good portion of the rest of my career. I was the executive officer on the USS John C. Stennis when it was commissioned, commanded an amphibious ship, the USS Shreveport, commanded the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, the aircraft carrier. Got a beautiful picture over my left shoulder, or in Zoom, it might be my right shoulder. I'm not sure which. Uh, um, Toward the end of my Navy career, that I was promoted to flag, and right around 2000, did a couple of years in England on a NATO tour. Spent a year as the strike group commander on the USS George Washington, deployed. We were the second ship back into the Gulf after the second round of activity in Iraq there. And then, interestingly enough, I then went and commanded all of the East Coast naval aviation assets. So all the carriers, all the squadrons, all the people. Fantastic job, just absolutely wonderful. But for my last job in the Navy, they decided I needed to do IT stuff. And I spent 3 years as the commander of the Naval Network Warfare Command, which at the time owned all of the Navy's IT infrastructure, all of its computer network defense, and a lot of other very, very interesting stuff that we normally don't talk about. It was a fascinating job and a fascinating 36 years, all well set up by my early days in scouting.
Uh, so let me ask you. Let's wind yourself back into scouting. You were growing up, what, Virginia, was it?
I grew up in Virginia Beach, Virginia. I was a Cub Scout for a while, but didn't stay with it, and then went back into Boy Scouts. I didn't go through the Weeblo route like my son did, but I had a pretty standard, Boy Scouting advancement path. I was not one of these kids who put his Eagle badge on when he was 12 years old. I think
17 and 11 months.
I was 17 and going into my senior year of high school when I made Eagle, but got to do a lot of wonderful things in Scouts. You know, Camping every summer. We did 50-mile boot and paddle trek while I was a Scout. Did not have the opportunity to go to Philmont. I would have certainly loved to. But scouting was just it was an integral part of my growing up, and I look back on it now. You see so many kids that they get up to where they turn teenagers and they get interested in other things around the star lifetime frame. My son's old scoutmaster used to call it the three G's: girls, gasoline, and I forget what the third one was now. But it attracted guys away from scouting, and I'm glad I stayed with it, because it served me well. It really did serve me well. In college, it served me well in the Navy, and I think folks may not realize it, but if you have Eagle Scout on your resume and you decide to go into the military, that carries a lot of weight. For example, when I'm a graduate of the University of Virginia, I went there on an ROTC scholarship, and that's why I could afford to go to school there. And when the Navy looks at your resume as a young kid coming out of high school, and whether you want to go in as an enlisted person or you want to go to ROTC, and you've got an Eagle rank sitting in your application, carries a lot of weight with those guys, because they know the kind of program that the Boy Scouts run.
Yeah, I guess it describes, there's a young person with all the distractions in life having the facilities to complete what they started.
Hmm.
at such a young age, right? Because it's really valuable as an adult, but to be able to complete it in that age with all the stuff that's going on and the vagueness they see in front of them, that's it says a lot. So, University of Virginia, ROTC, and then you're up for 5 years, right, or 4 years back then, perhaps.
Yeah, well, I went to flight school. It was 4 years when I came out. Then when I went to flight school, that committed me to another five. So yeah, I had to stay for five.
And what was the service you were on a carrier, the in support of aircraft at the time?
No, no. I mean, when I graduated from college, I went right to flight school.
Okay.
So finished college in 1974, very very long time ago. I went right to Pensacola, Florida, to start flight school. Um, so it's about a 9 to 12 month program. And when I finished down there, I went through training actually at first to be a navigator. I flew A6 intruders, and so it's a two-person crew, a pilot and a bombardier navigator. I came right back to Oceana from my A6 training, and I did my first 3 years in the Navy as an A6 bombardier navigator. In a VA-85 was the squadron designator for the Navy on board the USS Forrestal. Made 1 6 month deployment to the Mediterranean. This was Cold War time, so it's very, very different than what they're doing out there today. We spent most of our time sailing around the Mediterranean, saw a lot of wonderful ports, saw a lot of Russian ships. You know, we were worried about different things.
So,
Um,
so let me ask you this: so how does a kid from Virginia Beach get handed over an aircraft to fly?
well, you know, the Navy is really good at giving you a lot of responsibility early, and
Yes.
I mean, it's a fact, and it used to when I was commanding Eisenhower, we had distinguished visitors come out all the time, and company CEOs, politicians, and when I would ask them what's their biggest problem, they would always say, "Well, the hardest problem we have is getting people who want to work. You know, we have a difficult time finding people who want to work." And I'd usually tell them, "Well, look out over that flight deck down there. There's a lot of sailors out there that are working hard, and we don't have any trouble getting them to work. And their average age out there is about 19 years old. And so, the young men and women on the decks of aircraft carriers are kids that are not long out of high school. And the Navy gives them a lot of responsibility. When I would taxi an airplane around the flight deck at night, I can't see where the edge of the deck is. All I can see is a sailor out there with a couple of lights, waving his hands to tell me where to go. And it
Wow.
could be a 19 or 20-year old, driving my $50 million airplane around the flight deck. So there is no better, way to get responsibility early, either as an officer flying airplanes or driving ships or driving submarines, or as an enlisted person working on a carrier deck, or doing all the other myriad jobs those guys do, than to join the military. So I'm a fan. And I have to admit, I never really wanted to be in the Navy when I was growing up. I grew up in a Navy town, but didn't really want to be in the Navy. Um, I met my wife in college, and I promised her that I would do my 4 years and then I would get out of the Navy,
Oh no.
and I lied. So wound up staying 35 or 30 years longer than I told her I was gonna. It was a very fortunate, thing for me to wind up in the Navy. I kept saying, "Well, I'll quit when it's not fun anymore," and it never quit not being fun until I've been in for a very, very long
So let me so now first you got to learn to fly, right? And taking off
time.
and landing on a simple piece of hard stuff that's not moving, and then you got to learn to land on a carrier deck.
Right.
How do you get to that point? Do you have to, like, are there like wires out on the ground somewheres and you just keep on landing on them?
No, no, but what they do is on every Navy airfield that you go to, there's actually a square painted on the runway that's the size of the carrier deck. And every one of the things you learn to do very early on, um, we don't fly our airplanes in the Navy. We don't land our airplanes in the Navy the same way they do in the Air Force,
Oh,
and in the airlines. Because if you did, you'd never stop on a carrier deck. We fly them all the way down into the ground. It's really what it boils down to. if you've flown on an airliner, you get close to the ground, you feed the pilot, pull the nose up, and the airplane kind of floats down the runway, and you have this nice soft
Right.
touchdown. Ours isn't like that, and they start teaching you to land that way immediately when you start learning how to fly Navy airplanes. And there's actually a lighted device out on the left side of the runway when you land that tells you if you're on the proper glide path to land. And so every time you land an airplane at a Navy base, you're flying a Navy airplane, you're practicing landing on an aircraft carrier.
Putting
And
this thing on the path to, but it slams into the deck. The YouTube
it
video
does.
is
It does. You come down pretty hard. And not only do you come down hard, but as soon as you land, you assume you're not going to stop. So so as soon as the airplane touches the flight deck, you pull the stick back into your lap, you push the throttles forward, and until you feel the airplane coming to a halt. If you've caught a wire on the flight deck, it will stop you. And until some young kid steps out in front of you and tells you to pull the throttles back, you sit there at full power with your hook in the wire. So
so the first time you got to do this.
yeah.
An aircraft carrier it's huge when you're right up next to it. It's just
Mhm.
enormous. When you're at a few thousand feet and coming in at several hundred miles an hour, this is really postage stamp kind of size in a lot of gray ocean.
It is indeed. I mean, when you look down overhead, the aircraft carrier doesn't look very big. Um, when you roll in behind it, it doesn't look very big. But by the time you do it, you've probably flown several hundred practice carrier landings. And when you're getting ready to go to the ship, they send you out for special focus training on field carrier, what they call it field carrier landing practice at the field. And um, every landing that you do is graded, every single one. And
Okay.
there's a highly experienced aviator called a landing signal officer who stands there, and when you're doing field carrier landing practice, every landing that you fly gets graded, and they write down comments to record what you did when you were landing and how well you controlled the airplane. And then after you get back from flying, they come around and find you, and they sit down and say, okay, landing number one, you did this. Landing number two, you did this. Landing number three, you did this. And
So
that goes on.
go ahead.
That goes on forever. Um, when I was a squadron commander flying missions in combat, um, after the first couple of nights, it got to where landing back on the ship at night was scarier than it was flying into combat. That always get your heart rate up landing at night.
We're going to talk about the A6 all weather and nighttime. We're going to
Sure.
do that. But let me relate this back to scouting. So we've got these young people and we give them these criteria and it's always a stretch. It always seems to be above their head, right? And they get this book and all these requirements, and here they are in their first 2-3 years, and it just looks enormous. Was that kind of the same view? And you say, how do these guys do this stuff?
You sort of bite it off one piece at a time, right? I mean, there are amazing similarities between a military career and the 8 to 10 years, however long it is that you spend in scouting. I mean, you come in as a new guy, you learn the basics. You're not really in charge of anything. You learn how to follow orders. You learn how to take care of yourself in the outdoors. You recognize that there are things you have to do to advance. There are requirements that you have to do. There are badges that you have to earn. There are skills that you have to get. Um, and perhaps more importantly, that there's an element of leadership that is expected of everybody in the military and everybody in scouting. And and the further up the food chain you get in scouting, the greater the leadership responsibility that you're going to face. So you look at a kid who's a senior patrol leader or a senior leader in a troop. My guess is if that young person looks back to the day he walked through the door as a brand new tenderfoot, he probably looked at that Life or Eagle Scout who was a senior patrol leader and said, "Wow, how will I ever learn how to do that?" I
Right.
mean, it's the same way you eat an elephant, one bite at a time.
And then the next
Um,
thing you know, you're the senior patrol leader.
there you go. And the leadership, that you get, the leadership skills that you learn in scouting, um, translate directly to the military, they translate directly to any civilian career too, frankly. Um, and you can't succeed in scouting without exhibiting leadership. But I think that anybody that goes into scouting, they put the tools out in front of you to learn the leadership skills that you need to move ahead. So it's just, I don't think there are too many things you can do that better prepare you to go on and do whatever it is you decide to do when you graduate from high school.
That's fantastic. So we have in the program now, we have women in the program.
Well, it's interesting. When I was the CO of Eisenhower, Eisenhower was the first woman to get a first aircraft carrier to get a fully gender integrated crew. So we had women come in, and there was a lot of, this is going to be not good. And I said, you guys got to be kidding me. First of all, boys behave better when girls are around. It's my general experience, and they normally did. But the other side of it is you can't ignore 51% of the population, and I was always a big advocate for expanding women's roles on the military side of the house. I haven't had any experience with the Boy Scouts directly since they changed the policy and started allowing young ladies to join. I can't imagine that it will do anything other than make it a stronger and better organization.
Yeah, me too. Me too. And I think that was Baden-Powell's original intent, but the Victorian age back then,
Oh
when
yeah,
when he rewrote it, was having nothing to do with it. And so I'm going to get back to the military.
sure.
Let's talk about the A6.
Okay.
So this is a for the scouts that don't know this or be listening to this. There are letters ahead of all the aircraft. K. They all mean something. Now the A6 has a long history, almost 40 years, I guess, of
Hmm.
active attack, right? So the A stands for you're not out there dog fighting it, or you're delivering. You're headed for a target, a nominally land target or sea target. Is that correct?
That's right. It's an all-weather medium attack airplane. And so when you think why medium attack, well, big attack is like B-52s. The Air Force does, big attack. You can't be but so big and fly off an aircraft carrier. But the A6 Intruder um, came into came into the Navy's inventory during the Vietnam timeframe. Brought a capability for delivering ordnance at night and in all weather that frankly did not exist at the time. And so our mission was all about low level at night. Um, if the weather's bad, the bad guys can't see you, but we could normally still see and find them. And so, frankly, bad weather was our friend. Darkness was our friend. The 31 combat missions I flew in Desert Storm, I think 28 of them were at night. And so we realized we needed this capability. You can't just let the enemy have the night where and say you can't go do anything and you can't deliver bombs accurately. So the A6 could carry a very large load of ordnance. It was a real workhorse kind of airplane. Carries a crew of two, a pilot and a bombardier navigator. As I mentioned to you before, I did my first 6 years in the Navy as a bombardier navigator, and then in my late 20s as a young lieutenant commander, I went back to flight school and learned how to fly on the other side. Came back and did another 4 deployments as a pilot. All in all, I've got just over 1,000 carrier landings in the A6. Well, actually, that includes my training command, so a little bit less than that in the A6, and a little over 4,000 hours. So it was a great airplane to fly. It went out of service in the late 90s. So and I think it came into service really in the mid 60s. So over 30 years of great work for the Navy in the A6.
So you take off with live stuff.
Oh yeah, sure.
And if you didn't deliver the package, I don't know what you want to call it, gifts of state. You had to come back and land with that.
Well, no, it depends. It depends. And so you can bring. It depends on how much the airplane weighs and what you're carrying. So some ordnance you can bring back aboard the airplane, but if you're carrying a really large load of bombs and for some reason you just can't get to the target, you're going to have to go someplace and probably get that stuff off your airplane before you come back. Sometimes they would send you send you ashore. When we were operating off carriers in the Persian Gulf, um, we still could, if we needed to, land ashore in Qatar or Kuwait, or not Kuwait, that was on bad guy side. Saudi Arabia, places like that. They could send us ashore to have ordnance downloaded if we needed to. But it frankly doesn't happen very often. And then as we moved into smarter and smarter weapons, it used to be the A6 could carry 28 500-pound bombs, and they would carry ordnance loads like that in Vietnam. But with the advent of precision weapons and laser guided weapons, our standard ordnance load in Desert Storm was 2,000-pound laser guided bombs. And so you could go out there and with a laser guided bomb that's put exactly where you want it. First, you're not throwing ordnance all over the countryside. When you're going out to hit a target, you're going out to hit something very, very, very specific.
So
And a specific point in the target. So if you're going to an oil refinery or something like that, you're looking for a very, very specific thing to drop your weapon on.
I did read that the A6 actually has delivered a significant amount of the precision bombs during that. While there's some Air Force stuff after they got air superiority, that when everything was starting, like the first couple of days, it was a lot of A6s because the carriers kind of like could get a lot closer than flying in hundreds of miles or thousands of miles and a lot
Yeah,
of
there
bombs.
was you get an Air Force and a Navy guy in the room, and you can have a fight all day long about who carried the load greater in Desert Storm. But we carried a lot of laser guided weapons in there. Early on, the emphasis in that conflict was about taking out Iraqi tanks, and a laser guided bomb is a really good thing with which to take out a tank. So we did a lot of nighttime tank chasing, and but the airplane could carry, in addition, it could carry a lot of other precision weapons. We could carry anti-ship missiles. We could carry rockets. We could carry anti-radiation missiles. So just about anything you could strap on an airplane, you could strap onto the A6, and you could usually strap a bunch of them on there.
Wow.
It was a very, very interesting experience for me, and my only combat time in my 36 years in the Navy. It was very interesting. We were sailing across when we knew the war was coming. I was a squadron CO, and there were only two people on the whole ship that had flown in combat before. One was the CO of the ship, and the other was the Admiral who rode the ship with us. So we had to go ask both of them to come down and give a pep talk to the guys in the room, because none of us, we were all post-Vietnam guys. Nobody had flown in combat. I'll never forget my strike group commander said, "How many of you guys played football in high school?" And probably 2/3 of the hands went up in the ready room. And he said, "It's just like the big game. You go out there and you play the first couple of plays, and you say, 'Yeah, I can do this.' And so you'll go out there the first couple of missions, and you'll be real scared, and you'll go, 'Yeah, I can do this.' And that's pretty much how it worked. After the first couple of nights, you quit being scared all day long, and then it just got down to where it was the mission that you did every day."
So A6 all weather and night. That probably also implies landing all weather and night, right? It's
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Yeah, I think I told you I have just over 1,000 carrier landings. Probably a third of them are at night.
oh God.
Um, and I will tell you that landing on the carrier in the daytime, once you learn how to do it, is fun. I mean, you could just sit out there and go around the pattern all day long. It's a lot of fun. For me, it was never fun at night. I was always all day long before I flew at night. I always had a little flutter in my stomach, and I knew that the day was going to end with a very challenging evolution. I can to this day remember my last night carrier landing off the coast of Hawaii, and I remember landing and think, because I was a squadron CO and I knew that I was pretty much done flying after that, and I said, "Good, no more night landings." uh, but you got to be able to do it. They put heart rate monitors on guys in Vietnam when they were testing, and they found that their heart rate was higher when they were landing aboard the ship than it was when they were flying their missions in combat. So landing on a carrier will get your heart rate up, and it's a challenge.
Yeah, the YouTube videos that are out there, I just cannot comprehend. Maybe the visual, and it's not like lit up like a city here. This This is really trying to be pretty discreet when it's in the ocean here.
No, no, it's very, very small. And in actuality, you fly an instrument approach till you're down to about 3/4 of a mile. And you don't look outside really until you're inside a mile from the ship. And when you're inside a mile from the ship, you're less than 30 seconds from landing. So, so the whole idea is to fly a very, very accurate instrument approach so that when you look outside, you're getting what they call a good start. You know, you're lined up on the center line and you're on the right place on the glide slope, so you don't have to make any big corrections. Um, you know, sometimes if you get too far off, they'll wave you off and you take it around and come around and try again. Or sometimes you'll land and either land long of the wires or occasionally the hook will bounce over the wire and you're going to go around again. So you have to assume on every landing that you're not going to stop. And you come around and you do it again. I mean, I've been out at sea where there was just no place else to go. You were landed on this ship. We were too far away from the beach to fly ashore. So you're landing here.
And the
And
weather's getting worse, and that gigantic ship actually does rock pretty significantly.
it can, it can. Carriers are big. They don't move around like the small boys do, but they can, especially in the out in the open ocean, they can get into this up and down thing where the back end of the ship is moving up and down. And in the daytime, you can see that, and it'll get your attention. At night, you can't really see it because all you see is that little lit square, and that little lit square is very, very small at night. And the lens that you're using to control your glide slope on the left side of the ship that you're looking at to tell if you're at the right altitude, it's gyro stabilized. So when the ship's moving up and down, the glide slope is stabilized. Um, but if you get out of sync with the deck and you're coming into land about the same time the deck is coming up, they'll wave you off so that you don't, plant the airplane and break something.
So we finished with the command. We finished with the flying and the command. You were in a position to give instructions and orders to people whose your ability to tell them what they need to do was actually a life matter, right? There are professions in the world
Sure, sure.
where you have to make decisions that aren't 100% all the time.
I, I, uh, there's two things I can tell you about that. I mean, one was when I was a squadron commander, and I can clearly remember signing the first night's combat flight schedule saying, okay, these are the guys I've chosen to go on the first night. These are the guys who are flying together. These are the ones we put in the missions we want to go. These are the first guys who are going to fly into harm's way. And so you do. When you're the CO of a carrier, which I was for 3 years and made 2 deployments on board Eisenhower, um, there's not a day that goes by that you don't make a decision because when there are airplanes in the air and there are decisions that need to be made about whether to launch, whether not to launch, um, the captain is usually the one who winds up as the ultimate authority to make that decision. You're the hotel manager, you're the airport manager, you're the guy that's driving the airport. And so that's why, for example, only rated naval aviators can be the COs of aircraft carriers. Um,
Okay.
you have to be either a Navy pilot or a naval flight officer to command an aircraft carrier because
Okay.
you have to have been there and done it um, to be able to make the kind of decisions that you need to make almost every day when you're flying airplanes off the ship.
And it's never 100% of the information you need, right?
Oh, of course not.
So let's reflect. We got some young people listening here, and you will find that decision making. Sometimes people get locked up, right? They just not given enough, and I see it in the industry, and I see and the capacity to make a decision on what is the safest, what is the best thing to do to move forward is it takes leadership. Actually takes some mistakes on or at least mistakes of others, right? You study, you learn, you watch, you can live vicariously through a senior patrol leader and their decisions, right?
Well, what we used to say is, that which doesn't kill you only makes you stronger, right? So you got to learn from what you do. I tell you, where you really learn is you learn from watching your leaders. Um, we joke in the Navy that every SEAL is a leader. whether you're leading by position, whether you're leading by the example that you set, whether you're leading, everybody's a leader. Um, and the other thing is that they'll tell you that most young men and women who join the Navy, their decision to stay is tremendously affected by the leader, their immediate leader in their first organization. I was blessed with a tremendous squadron commander in my first squadron tour who I admired tremendously, and I said, I want to be like that guy. And so that that keeps you around. By the same token, I have met guys who decided to get out of the Navy because they went to work for, everybody's a leader, whether you're being a good example or a bad example, you're being an example of something. And so if you're in a position of responsibility, you're going to be watched. You talk about decision making. There's a bit of an art to decision making. There's a bit of an art to leadership. You can teach some, and some just seems to come. Some comes with experience, I guess is the best thing to say. And part of that experience is knowing when you have enough information to make a good decision. And sometimes the situation will force you to choose. You've got to choose. This guy's coming aboard, or he's not, or he's, you got to choose, and you got to choose now because he's going to run out of gas if you don't. The other side of the fence is there are some decisions that shouldn't be made until the time is right, and you have enough information to make a good choice, and you've had time to think things through, and you've had time to be comfortable with your decision that you're going to make because you're going to be responsible for it. And those things just come with experience. But that's why we all, we work our way up through a food chain, no matter where you are. If you're in Scouts, you're going to work your way up through a food chain. If you're in industry, same thing. Some will move up faster than others, and it usually is based on their ability to assimilate those lessons and information from those around them and make good choices.
See, let me ask you this, and then we'll get back. Tell me your impression of the doctors and nurses in the ERs in our big cities and towns, and where they're strapped.
Oh man, oh man! I tell you, I can't imagine. You know, when I flew in combat, I had to be scared for 30 minutes a day. That was it. 30 minutes over the beach, I was back between the sheets, and life was good. These men and women who get up every morning and walk into what, frankly, is just another form of combat, every day, are incredibly brave. I went to war college after I finished my squadron tour, and I had some Army folks in the war college with me who had been on the ground in Desert Storm. And it's a much different thing being on the ground in combat 24/7 than it is being out on the ship. And these doctors and nurses, God bless them, they're all volunteers at what they do. Just like our men and women in the military are. They're volunteers at what they do. And thank God we've got them. They're, I don't think many of them actually realized when there are some who sign up to be infectious disease people, and they know that they're going to be in risky situations. But there are folks out there today that I suspect are in a position for something that they didn't think they were signing up for when they signed up to be a doctor or a nurse. They certainly signed up to comfort people and to help the sick and the dying, but they didn't necessarily sign up to put their own lives at risk while they were doing it. And now many of them are doing it, and they're doing it every day. And my hat's off to each and every one of them. In many ways, what they do is a lot harder than anything I ever had to do. So I'm glad they're out there doing their job.
Yeah, there's three professions that everything can go right, and you might not come home: the military, firefighting, and police.
Yep.
We can add in there our hospitals and emergency services and our medical side.
It's interesting. I think it's the Carnegie Foundation gives heroism awards every year, and they name heroes, and they exclude the military and first responders, not because they don't think those people are heroes, but they define a hero as somebody who puts their life at risk when their job would not normally require it.
Right.
The person who who jumps out in front of a train to save somebody's life and puts their own life at risk when they could have stood back and done nothing. And our doctors and nurses, they kind of fall. You signed up to be a firefighter. You sort of said, okay, I'm willing to take that risk. I signed up to fly airplanes. I said I'm willing to take that risk. These doctors and nurses, many of them, when they signed up, they're facing a risk today that I don't think they ever anticipated they would face. And based on what I see in the news and the reporting that's going on, they're doing us all proud.
Yeah, yeah, and we're all going to learn from this too.
No, no doubt about it. No doubt about it.
And so I appreciate that. I wanted to bring it up because I see them, and
Hmm.
I know the fear, I know the pride when this all comes to an end, and it will. That profession has and always has, and now it is among the top people to care about others. It is right up there.
Yep.
Right
Yep.
up. They stuck this out, and some coming out of retirement too. And these aren't young people, and knowing there's help needed, and here's these new graduates getting yanked right into the fight.
Hmm. Hmm.
So some of the old guys couldn't take, that people get sick, and wow, it's combat. And this is a year. This is gonna be a year long, perhaps. This is a tough one.
It's going to be, and like I say, though, I have great faith just that we will get through this. Just like I mean, it will be difficult, but we'll get through it, and we'll come out of it stronger on the other end.
Yep. Let me move. So now we're in command, aircraft carriers. So
Hmm.
there's like 3,000 plus personnel on board. 3,600, 4,000.
Close to 5,000.
Okay, and two-thirds of them are there to support the aircraft. Is it?
Yeah, if you look at there's 5,000 folks aboard, and you can think of them in kind of in three big bunches of people. There's the crew of the aircraft carrier. That's probably a little, right about half, 20, 24, 2,500. There's the air wing that's aboard, and that's all the airplanes, right? There's an air wing commander, and there are 6 or 7 squadrons of airplanes on board, somewhere between, you know, 50 and 75 airplanes, and about 2,000 people there whose job it is to make those airplanes fly every day. And then there's a bunch of staff folks aboard. There's an admiral aboard with a staff. There's a destroyer squadron commander who rides a carrier with a staff. A couple of hundred total, but they're the guys who set the big tone every day. And so I used to say, as the aircraft carrier, my job was like say airport manager, but it's more like city manager, because on an aircraft carrier, you have everything you have in a city. We had a fire department, we had an airport, we had a hospital, we had a jail, we had doctors, we had dentists. You know, you're a self-sufficient floating city at sea, and it runs just like that. Luckily, you get the cream of the crop people in the Navy that come work for you to help you run that big organization. Um, but it really is a floating city. 20,000 meals served a day, 24/7. Basically, the ship never sleeps. Guys down in the bottom of the ship that don't see the light of day for days or sometimes weeks at a time, that are working down in the nuclear propulsion plants. Young kids who work down on the catapults and the arresting gear, down under the decks, that machinery that throws these airplanes into the air and then catches them when they get back. It's an amazing ballet to watch. And as I mentioned to you earlier, average age, pretty young, probably low to mid 20s if you took all 5,000 and average the ages out. So if you ever want something to restore your faith in young people in America, if your faith has shaken for some reason, it's a great place to go watch the show.
I'm a scoutmaster. It's not. It's
There
not.
you go.
I got the best of the best. So, if we wrap up and take not even wrapping up, but if we look at an aircraft carrier and it goes out with an entourage of destroyers and some
Hmm.
submarines, perhaps there's a
Right.
task force, there's a group that moves,
Hmm.
and they all have different functions amongst each other. I just was reading that one of those task force has more aircraft than the overwhelming number of countries in the world.
Um,
You can take out China, you can take out England and France and Russia, and and you start coming down, and you're like, okay, you probably have more aircraft than the Netherlands.
Um, I don't know how many aircraft the Netherlands has, but it wouldn't surprise me if they don't have uh, they don't have as many airplanes as we carry on an aircraft carrier. It was interesting when I think I mentioned to you earlier. I did a tour in NATO, and there was a Belgian admiral who worked with me, who had just come from being the military aide to the King of Belgium. And I asked him one day, how many people are there in the Belgian Navy? And the answer was smaller than the number of people that were on my aircraft carrier. so,
So
so yeah, there.
otherwise,
And of course, that's the strength of an aircraft carrier, right? If you wanna go fight, 80% of the population of the world lives within 100 miles of the coastline, and so there aren't too many places in the world that you can't reach with carrier aviation. And the Air Force can certainly reach out globally from the United States. But we can park right off the coast and be there very, very quickly when we need to be. I mean, you saw that in Desert Shield and Desert Storm when carriers turned around and we mustered up 6 over there. You've seen it. There are 7 right now. It's interesting. There are 7 aircraft carriers deployed right now at sea. Now that the Theodore Roosevelt is back underway from Guam. So the when there's a hot spot in the world, usually the first thing the president asks is, where's the nearest aircraft carrier? Because if you need to put power there, an aircraft carrier task force with the things that come with it, aircraft carrier, as you mentioned, a couple of guided missile cruisers, usually a couple of guided missile destroyers, sometimes a submarine, all the bits and bobs that go with that, refueling ships and the airplanes, all of the destroyers carry helicopters. It's just a lot of capability wrapped up in that one package, and it can get someplace pretty darn quick.
yeah. So when we're launching all the different aircraft, right? There's fixed wing, there's rotary wing, but in the fixed wing, there's the fighter group, right? There's the attack groups, and there's also the refueling. They will take this size aircraft and actually put them aloft in case a pilot needs several rounds to get refueled if they can't bring in something from a land, and refuel, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Back in my day, there was a version of the A6 that was a tanker. That's all it did. It didn't have the weapon system. It just carried a lot of gas. It hung a bunch of gas tanks on the wings where you would normally put weapons, and the airplane would take off with 26,000 pounds of fuel to refuel other people. Over the course of the last several years, the different types of airplanes on the flight deck has come down pretty dramatically. The numbers are still there, and the capability is bigger, frankly, than it ever was. But almost everything on the flight deck now is some version of an F-18. So you've got F-18 single-seat F-18Es, two-seat F-18Fs. The EA-6Bs were replaced by the F-18G, so the Growler two-seater.
Okay.
So that's done by an F-18, and then you've got the E-2D Hawkeye, the Navy's version of the AWACS that flies on and off aircraft carriers.
The big radar, the dome on the top. Yeah.
Giant radar dome on the top. Yep. And then, of course, the SH-60, several different variants of the SH-60 helicopter. So if you look at a flight deck right now, it looks like there's only about 3 different kinds of airplanes on there, and there's a lot of smart reasons for doing that. Back in my day, there were, I think 7 different kinds of airplanes, 7 supply chains, 7 different, this, that, and the other.
Spare parts, and the
That's
engine
right.
on
So
an
you get a lot of
F-18.
standardization in flying, a lot of standardization in training, but there's still tanking that needs to be done. And so you can strap a portable tanking pod onto an F-18 and send it off the deck. And if you got a long way to go, they'll send tanker configured F-18s along the way to refuel the other guys so that it extends their range.
I'm going to bring up A6. Just I'm going to share my screen here, and let me point out a few things. So we're going to be audible. Maybe you'll be on.
Oh, isn't that beautiful?
And it is. It is a couple of pieces. The first thing everybody, and even online, is this is your refueling, right?
That's right. Now I have to point out, this is a KA-6D. This is a tanker airplane.
I could probably see it by here.
Yeah, and the way you can tell The way you can tell is you can see the refueling package underneath the back, and what that is a 50-foot hose wound around a great big drum, and you extend it, and it's got a basket on the back that when an airplane flies up behind you, if it's another A6, he sticks that fueling probe into the basket, and you can transfer gas from one airplane to the other.
50 feet? You were behind and below this aircraft 50 feet.
Oh, yeah, no, you're actually much closer to it than that. But the hose is 50 feet. It's probably out 30 to 40 feet. And when they plug in, they're going to push it in, 4 or 5 feet. So you're probably 20 feet away from the other airplane when you're refueling.
Oh, okay. All
But
right.
that's no closer. If you're going to fly formation on a guy's wing, you're going to be anywhere from 5. In combat, you're going to spread out a little bit so that you have better visibility and you're not spending all your time having to stare at the airplane next to you. But for routine formation flying, 8 to 10 feet apart is about where you are.
Okay, that's pretty good for a couple 100 miles an hour.
Yeah, very different than the way the Air Force does it. They have these great big tankers, and they actually lower a boom and drive the probe into the receptacle on the top of the airplane, as opposed to us.
You're
We have
getting
to fly up and stick that probe in the basket. Well, that's where you want it. It's nice and close, and it fills your whole field of view, and especially at night, because that other airplane acts as your gyroscope. And you talk about the speed, but the speed is a relative thing, right? So if you're both going 250 miles an hour, which is the standard speed we use to refuel that, when you're closing up to join up on the guy, you're only going to be going 5 or 10 miles an hour faster than he is until you sneak up close, and then you slow down, and it's just like pulling up behind a guy in a car.
Holy cow! All right. Okay.
You
So
can see that one's got a bunch of tanks hanging underneath the wing, so
yeah, more fuel, right?
it's loaded to carry a lot of fuel. Yep.
And the wing configuration, I just read about this. The wing configuration was adopted for the 14. Is that right? That became the as extended. The low rather than the hypersonic or supersonic flight of a 14. Wasn't it virtually the same wing?
Yeah, no. It's a very different wing. The Air Force, the F-18, the F-14 wing was a swing wing fighter. So
Right.
when it was slow, the wings would be out, and when it was fast, its wings would literally swing back and fold back into a V shape.
Got it.
What the F-14 did have, if you have anybody in your audience that are pilots, at the end of the wingtips, they have what they call ailerons, and ailerons move up and down to cause the airplane to roll and turn. The A6 did not have ailerons; it had flaperons, and so the flaperon would pop up on the wing. It would cause that wing to fall, and that would cause the airplane to turn. And the F-14 didn't have ailerons either; it had flaperons. So the flaperon design that was first put on the A6 was adopted later and used in the F-14.
Maybe that's what I was reading. That was adopted.
That's probably what you read.
Oh, that's cool. All right, let me move on. So we've got a bunch of carriers out there. Very end of your career, there are a whole bunch of them working in unison, and so there's a lot of AWAC, a lot of control has to happen in communications and
Right.
electronics and information's flying left and
Mhm.
right.
Mhm.
You left there, and I want to talk about the end of your career because we got a lot of young people I know that in the electronics world and communications. You then dealt with the navies and their electronic um, world. Tell me more about that. Tell me what. That's
It's
that's
interesting
new, right?
to gauge the brain of your audience a little bit. When I went on my first cruise in the Navy, it was 1978. The only way for me to contact my wife was to write her a letter. It would take about 2 weeks to get there. For her to answer, it would take about 2 weeks to get back. So we numbered our letters. So if your letters got mixed up in transit, you knew that you'd miss something. If you got ashore and you wanted to call it home, you'd go to a telephone exchange. You'd wait an hour for an overseas line, and you'd talk for about 2 minutes because it was so expensive that you didn't do it. Nowadays, the aircraft carriers have email, so you can email your as long as they don't turn it off, and you turn it off sometimes when things are hectic. but you can do email from the ship. You can make telephone. Anybody on the ship can make telephone calls from the ship. We had a thing called Dial a Sailor. We actually had a bank of telephones where you could go and you could call home. I could pick up a telephone on my desk on the bridge, dial a 7-digit number in Norfolk, Virginia, and my wife would pick up the phone. So the communications that we have today, it's stunning. You know, we've gone from the no computer age to the fully digital age. And I was fortunate enough in my last job to own the Navy's network. Most of the shore-based networks, not the shipboard networks, but the shore-based networks. And it was a fascinating thing. They didn't send me there because I was an IT guy. They sent me there because I was a combat experience leader, and they wanted me to help. You know, we viewed the network in the Navy as another warfighting system. You can't fight wars today without a network. You cannot survive in a combat environment without connectivity. And on an aircraft carrier, that connectivity comes. You know, we're not dragging a cable around behind it, so it all comes through satellites, and it requires a lot of very sophisticated um, electronics to make that stuff work. You'd probably be surprised at how much bandwidth an aircraft carrier has. I'm not current, so I wouldn't even want to cite a number. I've been out for 10 years now, but it's more than you might think, and it's enough to support a crew of 5,000. We couldn't web surf because there wasn't enough bandwidth for guys to web surf, but you could send email and you could do most of that other kind of stuff.
It
Uh,
also makes it, you need to be resistant too, right? Because now
you
it's kind
do.
of vulnerability.
I mean, you've got it's the same thing you learn at home about good basic computer hygiene, right? One of the things I was responsible was for network defense, and frankly, the biggest threat to the Navy's networks was um, sloppy network practices and protocols. You know, passwords. You know, you got to have a tough password. You got to have. Nowadays, we have all the things in the Navy, multi-factor authentication. You know, you've got a card, your ID card now that if you don't stick it into a slot, it's hooked to your computer. You can't log on. But your networks are critical. I mean, they're critical to warfighters. You know, we are a networked force. Um, Sometimes that's good, sometimes that's bad. It used to be when you sailed away over the horizon, they couldn't talk to you anymore. Well, now they can reach out and talk to you anywhere. Um, but the Navy really needs folks who understand that business, who can do that business well, and not only do it from a technical side, but they need people. You can't fly an airplane today if you don't understand computers. You know, you can't do. I can't think of a job in the Navy that you can do without without some degree of computer literacy. And woe be to the ship that loses its computer connectivity because somebody was able to get into their system and shut it down, or somebody was able to get into their system and glean information from it. Have a very rigorous inspection system. I was responsible for developing the inspections and developing the protocols we would use to go out and test ships. And this was very early on. I did this from 2007 to 2010. So this was very early on in what now has become a lot of common knowledge about hacking that's done by foreign countries and how those countries use social media to influence things.
Right.
And I mean,
Right.
social media reaches out to ships. You can get to Facebook on a ship just like you can from shore. Uh, so I was never quite sure whether I loved email as a commander on the ship or hated it. You know, my wife hasn't emailed me today. Well, okay, I got it. But on the other hand, it's a wonderful morale thing for sailors. You know, it's funny. You talk about the things that people are doing now, like this, just like what you're doing today, to put something together for your scouts so they can still have a virtual experience. Well, nowadays, you know, sailors at sea can get that virtual experience if they need to. If there's a birth at home, if there's a big event, if there's something that goes on, they're able to talk to their families in real time, and it's a great capability to have. It's one we have to protect and guard very jealously because you can't open it up too much because, as you understand, the more open you make those things, the more vulnerable they become.
That's so you finished your career,
Mhm.
and then you went on to civilian, and
I
was
did.
it Hewlett Packard? You said, right?
I
HP.
did. Well, I retired. I retired from the Navy in 2010, and then I went to work for Hewlett Packard. Um, uh, Hewlett Packard at the time was the company that was running the Navy's network that actually worked for me when I was in the Navy. So they thought that I would be a good guy to work for them, and that I could help them understand the Navy and deliver a better product to the Navy. And so I went to work for Hewlett Packard, and I worked in the commercial IT business from 2011 until I retired in 2017. So 3 different iterations of companies, but as they spun off companies from Hewlett Packard. But I sat at the same desk doing the same thing, which was I was delivering as the contractor. I was delivering information technology services to the Navy and in their shore-based infrastructure. So it was a natural fit for me. I loved my client because I used to be them, and I understood their business and I understood how important it was. So it was a great place to be.
So how about leadership management in a commercial? Is slightly different, or
Uh, yes, it is different. I think. Um, it's different because in the military, uh, you never there's an expectation that if I tell you to go do something, you're going to go do it, right? Now, and in the military, that's pretty clearly understood. I would like to think that I was a leader that people followed in the military, not because I told them to do something, but because you show them it's the right way to go.
very
I
good
would
point.
argue that the leadership principles don't change much, but the manifestation of those leadership principles sometimes is different. Because on the commercial world, they don't necessarily have to go do what you tell them to do, and it's not the military. And there are fewer things you can tell them to do. Companies are organized differently than the military. They're not as hierarchical as the military are. They are more, oh gosh, what was the term we were using at the time? They're blended and they're networked. And in many cases, to be successful in industry today, um, you're not just going to get a bunch of stuff and a bunch of people and a bunch of gear. You have to make your case for what it is that you want it to go do to get ahead. Um, and so the leadership, people still look at you. They listen to what you say, and then they look to see if you do what you say, and they look to see if you're willing to make good decisions. And the other thing I think that people look at, and this is true whether you're in the Navy or whether you're in the commercial industry, is whether or not you take care of the people who work for you. And I learned that very early on from some very good leaders. That if you take care of the people that work for you, then they will take great care of you. I joke that I rode to 3 stars on the shoulders of great sailors and officers that worked for me. That's very true in the commercial world as well. The people who are successful, there are some people who are successful because they're really smart guys who build a really neat product, and then they start a company, and eventually they usually wind up having to bring in somebody else who knows how to do leadership to run their company. There's some great exceptions to that. Bill Gates is one.
Right.
There are others. Um, but in the end, if you're going to run something that's big and you're going to run something with a lot of people in it, then you got to be concerned about the people, and you got to be concerned about making an environment where they can do their jobs.
So I'm gonna wind this up. I'm gonna ask you an interesting question, and that is, when you look backwards, everything's really clear to your career how you got where you are, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you're looking forwards, it's not, and it never is.
Yeah.
And if you were to leave something to these scouts that they're just looking forward to high school, perhaps, there's it's kind of a blur for them, and in their scouting career, these are a bunch of the greatest young people that we have. What would you tell them? What would you want to tell them?
Well, I tell them that first of all, you know, it's okay to make mistakes while you're growing up and learning how to do things. I made some really awful mistakes early on in my Navy career. One that almost cost an airplane once, and I had a CO who was very understanding and felt like I'd learned my lesson, and on I went. Um, so you're going to make mistakes. You got to learn from your mistakes, and you don't spend a lot of time, worrying about it. You move on. But but I think the most important thing I could tell you is that As you move on through your high school years and into college, find something that you really like to do. I think there are people that they look down the laundry list of things where they can get paid the most, and they say, "Well, I need to go do that so I can earn a lot of money." If you find something that you like to do, then you never have to work, right? Because it's not work when you like it. And as I mentioned to you earlier, I had no intention when I joined the Navy of staying one day longer than my obligation required me to stay. And I wound up staying for 36 years and loving every minute of it. And so if you like what you're doing, then life is good. So find out what your passion is and pursue it aggressively. And my guess is that it'll do two things for you: is you'll enjoy what you're doing, and it'll make you really good at what you do. So easy to say. Sometimes it's hard to find that thing, but boy, if you find it, life is really great.
Denby, thank you. I'm going to wrap this up. So, on behalf of Paparock District, Quinnipiac District, and Connecticut Yankee Council, your service, thank you very much for your service. And I know you're still involved in some of the memorials, the Navy Memorial. I did read that.
Yes.
Is that right? So please, when you do run into the rest of the personnel, please extend our thank you, and are just absolutely fantastic. We enjoy every single bit of what they do. Thank you again.
Well, thank you so much. And scouting was great to me. My son's an Eagle Scout. My daughter's a Girl Scout Gold Award winners. Scouting is a great thing, and I appreciate you allowing me today to meet with some of the fine young men and women in your organization. Thanks a bunch.
Thank you, Denby.
Take care.